Okay, welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News Incorporated, the corporate news versus us. And this is August 26th. We're having quite a discussion about the Trump's allegiances and which way are we going, folks? Are we going anyway? Let's just carry on and take us where we need to go, Jim.
Thank you. Well, we've talked about this before, but it seems to be gaining some traction. This is from The Atlantic, which is a liberal organization. When Kamala was a top cop, if elected, can the candidate be trusted to hold government officials accountable and oversee a progressive criminal justice system? Her past says no. When Senator Kamala Harris is criticized for action she took as San Francisco's district attorney or as California's attorney general, the presidential hopeful responds in two ways. She cites the most progressive aspects of her record, arguing she'll advocate in the White House for more reforms to the criminal justice system, and she asserts it's laudable to work for change from within broken institutions at the table where the decisions are made. She says very little, however, and nothing convincing about some of the most serious charges against her, such as fighting to keep innocents in prison and failing to fight hard against corrupt cops. If elected president, Harris seems as likely as any of her Democratic rivals and far more likely than Trump to pursue a criminal justice reform agenda that overlaps with policies I favor as a civil libertarian. And I do not hold it against Harris that as a municipal and state official, she enforced many laws I regard as unjust. All the candidates now running for president will, if elected, preside over the enforcement of some laws they and I regard as unjust. But like her rivals, the reforms Harris would sign into law as president would depend mostly on what Democrats in Congress could get to her desk. Far more important is how she would preside over a federal legal system and bureaucracy prone to frequent abuses. And her record casts significant doubt about whether she can be trusted to oversee federal law enforcement, the military, intelligence agencies, and detention of foreign prisoners, and more. I don't doubt that Harris will continue to champion prudent criminal justice reforms, whether she continues in the Senate or becomes president. But speaking and even voting for sound criminal justice policies and being a trustworthy overseer of a sprawling criminal justice bureaucracy are very different things. I can forgive a politician a vote on a crime bill that looks ill-conceived 2 decades later, or a too slow evolution toward marijuana legalization, or even a principled belief in the death penalty, something I adamantly oppose. I find it far harder to forgive fighting to keep a man in jail in the face of strong evidence of innocence, running a team of prosecutors, withholding potentially exculpatory evidence from defense attorneys, and utterly failing as the state's top prosecutor to rein in glaringly corrupt district attorneys and law enforcement. At best, Harris displays a pattern of striking ignorance about scandalous misconduct in hierarchies that she oversaw. And she is now asking the public to place her atop a bigger, more complicated, more powerful hierarchy where abuses and unaccountable officials would do even more to subvert liberty and justice for all. Scott.
Jim, I don't think people really understand how desperate and vicious and racist and maniacal Harris, Kamala Harris would be. I think she would be worse than Hillary Clinton. I think she would take out a rage like David Banner turning into the Hulk. She would turn into an all-consuming witch of racial fury against white men, against men in general. She would see this as a revenge for her years prostituting herself before Willie Brown, sleeping her way into political opportunities and advantage. That creates a deep resentment in a woman. She has deep resentments that would come out. She would be Hillary Clinton in the fact of power and a Praetorian Guard, meaning she would reward the most corrupt police, similar to the way that the Clintons did. So you would have really the police state evolve like you've never seen before. I think Kamala Harris would be the death of America, because you would trigger a civil war instantly because of what she would do. She would have no restraint, no compassion. She would have no sanity. She would have no reason. It would be a pure leftist impulse for power. And anything that tried to reason with her, that tried to have a detente or a compromise or a rational discussion on things, she would flippantly disregard, look at you like an idiot or a racist or a bigot that should be lobotomized or killed or thrown in jail or all three. She would go into turtle mode. She would hunker down. She would cover her ears, cover her eyes, and not listen. It sounds very bizarre, but this is the intrinsic nature of Kamala Harris. As an angry woman, as a woman scorned, as a woman who's been treated like a whore, as a woman who's got a vileness, who knows if she's had abortions, there's another trauma. There's all these firecrackers going off in her being that will naturally equate and manifest in, I think, creating laws of a draconian nature and a White House of a draconian nature that would set up, a very vicious, imagine Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton morphing into one monstrosity, one, like the movie The Thing. Remember the movie The Thing? They had that image of the beings becoming one with the dual faces and horror. That's Kamala Harris. And I shudder, not because I fear her, because I just know it would be a civil war, because she has so much resentment and hostility, and she's going into the presidency looking to cut down and hack and break things and hurt people who do not agree with her and will not submit to her or will not be subservient to her or give their money to her or give their rights to her in pursuit of her utopian society, which means you're an enemy and you need to be destroyed. And she is under the delusion that Americans will just lay down and take it. They won't. The Second Amendment will be used, and I think you would have a civil war instantly triggered if Kamala Harris was elected. Not if Tulsi Gabbard was, because she's not got that. But Kamala Harris represents, and even Biden wouldn't go that way, but Kamala Harris, I think, represents the greatest threat to American solidarity and American life ever. I see that as a horrible hurricane of a torrent of destruction, unlike anything. But that's just my opinion, Jim.
Well, those are remarkable, but I think highly perceptive remarks. I think you're correct. Meanwhile,
hang on one second, Scott. You should know best because you're right down there in the Bay Area, San Francisco. Is Kamala Harris in your district? And how about Pelosi and Feinstein?
Let me tell you, San Francisco is 40 minutes away, and I drive there all the time. I do press TV interviews and RT interviews, and I'll tell you, there are zombies on the ground. There are dead corpses on the ground. There are needles everywhere. There are people wrapped in blankets. You've never seen, Tucker scrapes the surface, but you've never seen such a disheveled, destroyed San Francisco, tent cities. You see it in Los Angeles. It's because the liberals, the leftists, feed off of using the homeless as their pawns in this chess game of power and funding and, pushing people out of San Francisco so they can reclaim and buy the property and then sell it to their political partners. So homelessness and the Chinese Communist Party dominates and rules San Francisco too. You've got homelessness was like 2,000, and then it's jumped up to like 11,000 in the past 8 years. Kamala Harris is responsible for a lot. They're all responsible for that. Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, Shears, Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris. So San Francisco is disintegrating. Now, one bright spot is we have a Chinese woman running for mayor of San Francisco named Ellen Zhao. You'd probably like her on your show, Don. Her website's ellenformayor2019.com. ellenformayor2019.com. She is a pit bull Chinese capitalist Christian woman who's running for mayor against the mayor there. And if she wins San Francisco, it will be the Hiroshima for the left because it'll reverberate throughout the country and awaken all of the Asians, all of the Chinese, all of the Vietnamese, all of the Hindus who are already conservative family value people. They will be rising up, and they will be the counterbalance to the white milquetoast, effeminate, hetero or androgynous voter that we have in the country. Jim?
Fascinating, Scott.
Thanks.
Fascinating.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham, Horowitz will offer the Senate chilling testimony on FISA abuse. Senate Judiciary Chair Lindsey Graham confirmed Wednesday the Justice Department will testify for the committee. He predicted Horowitz will give chilling testimony about his highly anticipated report on the potential abuse of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. In other words, he's going to be talking about the origin of the Russia hoax, about which Robert Mueller was completely oblivious. Meanwhile, we have a fake news alert. Democrats and media pushing phony recession scare. The fake news media is acutely aware Trump's America First economic policies have been an historic success. Unemployment continues to be at near record lows. U.S. has regained status as #1 economy in the world. Business is booming. As sad and perhaps pathetic as it might sound, Democrats have a recession at the top of their wish list. An economic downturn would diminish the quality of life of low-income families and put people back on welfare after regaining their independence. So yes, a recession would be very worth getting rid of Donald Trump and these kinds of policies, HBO host of Real Time Bill Maher reportedly said. A recession would definitely knock him out of office. Liberal elites care nothing for the diminished opportunities of working people as long as they can regain power and put one of their own back in the White House. The bad news for the left, good news for hardworking Americans, the Trump economy shows no sign of slowing. That's why the fake news media has concocted yet another hoax, a phony recession. Meanwhile, Supreme Court, Ginsburg treated for tumor on her pancreas. These tend to be, by the way, fatal. The court said in a statement, a biopsy performed confirmed a localized malignant tumor. Ginsburg, 86, underwent a 3-week course of radiation therapy, but she's not likely to survive. Meanwhile, this is leading to a scare where David Axelrod warns his Supreme Court vacancy could tear this country apart. A former Obama advisor set the stage for a potentially nasty confirmation fight in the Senate next year, within an hour of the Supreme Court announcing that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently completed 3 weeks of radiation treatment after doctors found a localized cancerous tumor on her pancreas. If there's a SCOTUS vacancy next year, the Senate majority leader Kerry Stone his extraordinary promise to fill it despite his own previous precedent in blocking Garland. It will tear this country apart, David Axelrod said Friday. He was referring to how Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said earlier this year the Senate would consider a presidential nominee to fill a vacancy on the court if one occurred in 2020. Oh, we'd fill it, the Kentucky Republican said at an event in May. Meanwhile, Kurt Schlechter, this is a new blog at jamesfetzer.org. Get ready for Apocalypse Ruth. Progressives ghoulishly glee over the death of an old man turned into barely constrained panic when later that day it was revealed that their heroine, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was just treated for pancreatic cancer yet again. Their disgraceful joy at David Koch's passing was yet another reminder of the harsh truth that lefters want you dead or enslaved. Koch's sin was that he disagreed with the liberals, though in important ways also with conservatives. For that, these cretins danced around like idiots celebrating his succumbing, and they'll celebrate when you die too. Always believe people who tell you they hate you and want you dead. Oh, and never disarm. And he's pointing out that there's a woman candidate waiting in the wings who is going to put the fear of God into the liberals because she appears to be eminently qualified and very much to the right of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Scott.
Well, I think that's accurate. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she dies, hopefully very soon, will be a trigger for the most violent insanity we've seen on the left that'll make Kavanaugh look like Girl Scout cookies selling in a department store. The left will see in the death of Ginsburg, the death of a Jewish justice. So the Jewish leftists will come out and you'll have, remember, the left will try and take advantage of this. So they'll try and push for a more extreme Jewish woman to be appointed, all of that stuff. You'll have violent threats. You'll have, you very well could have riots and attacks by Antifa and all of this stuff. So it's going to be interesting to tell. But one of the things Donald Trump needs to do very quickly is recognize and write a executive order that recognizes the right to keep and bear arms, and the Second Amendment allows people to carry without a permit. The Second Amendment is the permit. Now, he can also in that say, and perhaps do it in gradations, but he should say, with regards to all of these dialogues, and I saw it this weekend on these idiots on Fox News who are up there talking about gun control, talking about assault weapons, talking about all this, and these idiots like Jim DeMint and the others are up there, instead of saying, look, this is what the Second Amendment's all about, providing old ladies in wheelchairs and senior citizens and people who are crippled or anybody who's a victim or has a high degree of probability of being a victim. The Second Amendment is to protect them, their lives, their family, their property. That's what the Second Amendment's for. That's what I want to talk about. And when people are armed to defend themselves, everybody's safer. You want to keep people safe from random crazy punk kids who who are crisis actors or some sort of fake cops covering themselves with blood. You arm good cops and good military people. So he should write an executive order that says every single U.S. military person, active or retired, has a right to keep and bear arms on their person at all times as civil police force people.
Right.
Not an official job, but they're entrusted as military. So you trust them with a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And also police officers. If you're a police officer or a former police officer, you have a right automatically to carry a firearm. That should be repping. Or a fireman. Recognize firemen to be able to carry firearms if you're former. Let's start imparting that trust to the most trusted elements of American society, and then move on from there to say, if you are a pastor or a preacher of a church, you have a right to keep and bear arms. If you are, an average citizen, you have a right to keep and bear arms. So he needs to move quickly in that direction, or else people are just going to automatically rise up and carry. But if he does it, it'll win him the allegiance of the NRA. And right now, the NRA is on very thin ice with him. And if he doesn't do it, he risks a lot of the NRA people picking up their ball and bat and leaving. So this is not Trump's election to win. It's his to lose. And with his Israeli foreign policy, he loses. With his anti-gun stance, he loses. With a war with China and a war with Iran and Russia, he loses. So he's got to keep these little smoldering, smoke fires under control and not let any of them get out of control. But the Second Amendment is a very important declaration he needs to make before the 2020 election. And I would say start with the military and the police and the firemen, and everybody will feel safer. Jim?
I'm very troubled that there's a story too late to include today about Trump endorsing red flag laws, Scott. That's going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. And this could harm him in the long run. All these factors put together are not a good sign. Meanwhile, here's fascinating. Faithless elector. A court ruling just changed how we pick our president. The decision could give a single elector the power to decide the outcome of a presidential election if the popular vote results in an apparent electoral college tie. A federal court ruled late Tuesday presidential electors who cast the actual ballots for president and vice president are free to vote as they wish and cannot be required to follow the results of the popular vote in their states. The decision could give a single elector the power to decide the outcome of a presidential election if the popular vote results in an apparent electoral college tie. This issue could be a ticking time bomb in our divided politics. It's not hard to imagine how a single faithless elector voting differently than his or her state did could swing a close presidential election, said Mark Murray, NBC News senior political editor. It hasn't been much of an issue in U.S. political history because when an elector refuses to follow the results of the state's vote, the state throws the ballot away. But Tuesday's ruling says states can't do that. The decision from a 3-judge panel of the 10th Circuit Court in Denver is a victory for Michael Barca, a Colorado Democrat elector in 2016. Under state law, he was required to cast his vote for Hillary Clinton, who won the state's popular vote. Instead, he crossed out her name and wrote in John Kasich, a Republican then governor of Ohio. The Secretary of State removed Baca as an elector, discarded his vote, and brought in another elector who voted for Clinton. In a 2-1 decision, the appeals court said the nullification of Baca's vote was unconstitutional. When voters go to the polls in presidential races, they're actually casting votes for a slate of electors chosen by the political parties of the nominees. States are free to choose their electors however they want, Tuesday's ruling said, and can even require electors to pledge their loyalty to their political parties. But once the electors are chosen and report in December to cast their votes as members of the Electoral College, they're fulfilling a federal function, and the state's authority has ended. The state's power to appoint electors does not include the power to remove them or nullify their votes, the court said. Because the Constitution contains no requirement for electors to follow the wishes of a political party, the electors, once appointed, are free to vote as they choose, assuming they cast their vote for a legally qualified candidate. A total of 30 states have laws that bind electors, requiring them to cast their vote for whichever candidate won the state's popular. But the laws are weak, providing only nominal penalties for what are known as faithless electors who fail to conform to the popular vote. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1952 that states do not violate the Constitution when they require electors to pledge they'll abide by the popular vote, but the justice has never said whether it's constitutional to enforce those pledges. Legal scholars said Tuesday's ruling was a first from a federal appeals court on the issue of faithless electors. It applies immediately to the 6 states of the 10th Circuit: Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Kansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. This court decision takes power from Colorado voters and sets a dangerous precedent, said Jana Griswold, Colorado's Secretary of State. Our nation stands on the principle of one person, one vote. We are reviewing this decision with our attorneys and will vigorously protect Colorado voters. The federal court ruling conflicts with a decision from Washington State Supreme Court in May, which said electors must follow the results of the popular vote. The power of electors to vote comes from the state, and the elector has no personal right to that role, the court said. Scott.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're entering a phase where you're seeing really the authoritarianism and the tyranny, and people like the essay you were citing earlier, Jim, by what's his name, Kaminsky.
Yeah.
Is profound, and the profound thinkers in the alternative media are all in agreement of this. Yourself, Phil Giraldi, Mike Maloof, myself, Kaminsky, the many of the other people that I'm not going to try and recite all of their names, but that we're familiar with, are recognizing a tyranny in ideas, and that is morphing into the information systems, the Google manipulating election results. We've seen that with the Google whistleblower coming forth and describing Google, manipulating algorithms to throw off and shutting down conservatives. Let's remember that my website was shown on CNN Business with the Sandy Hook honor group that was shutting down websites, and they said, quote, "Let's look at this guy, Army PSYOP, he's a winner," and they shut down my YouTube site. That was CNN. You couldn't get coverage like that.
You are a winner, my friend.
Yeah, they really are. They're great.
And they shut down that site largely because of my lifting up and heralding and praising Jim Fetzer and a lot of his work and our work together. When you and I and Don and Michael J. looked at the shooting in New Zealand and revealed it as forensically impossible and was obviously a fake shooting with no bullets hitting any bodies, no holes or blood spatter, and men of military experience know that video shooting is a total act. It's total false. It's got blanks. It's not real. People behave in certain ways when they're shot with high caliber weapons, and they don't have a choice. The body just pours out all sorts of shock and trauma and blood and damage. So when we put that out, we were shut down. But this shows you that Google and Facebook and these YouTube conglomerates are waging war against freedom of speech and the discussions of the internet. The guy who wrote an article in the World Wide Web, who was around when the internet was founded, said this has morphed into something I never dreamed, which is totalitarianism. So the mindset we see in Antifa and the left is now also shared by the mindset in the fascism of the engineers at Google and Facebook and their CIA handlers, and we know that. So there really needs to be an overthrow and a civil war in the alternative media, the deplatforming or the antitrust or monopolization, disintegration of these big companies, or going to other companies outside of the United States. The information age, which we thought was always going to be a blossoming flower of freedom and spew out the pollen of truth to fertilize and plant seeds in everybody's homes and minds and states, has been clamped down and is controlled by a fascistic, far left, lobotomized, anti-religion, environmental worshiping, and androgynous, transvestite, transgender psychopathy that is very, very dangerous for us. And again, it's sad because it shows me the America that we grew up in is deteriorating like someone with leprosy. And of course, we're separating, but it's very sad to behold. But only a civil war can remedy this, Jim, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say that Google has shut me down, and YouTube has shut me down about 4 times, and Google has such a reign on me that I can't even comment. I'm barred from any access to Google products. I can't even get on things anymore.
This is insane. This is supposed to be the United States of America. We're supposed to champion freedom of speech and freedom of the press, so we become the most suppressed and censored nation in the world. Yeah, absolutely lunatic.
We're standing for truth. They can't handle the truth. That's just outrageous here. That's not the way America is supposed to be. This is not it. Google is very nuts. You
got it. Meanwhile, turning to the Middle East, Iran's defense capabilities. Scott was on an interesting debate against a really feeble alternative. He was talking about Iran's new anti-missile system, which is about as good as S-400. Meanwhile, we had Putin ordering Russia to respond after the U.S. tested a missile. What was significant is this was a modified Tomahawk that was fired from a launcher that is like those that are used in Poland and Romania. It's indisputable now. And of course, this had to do with pulling out of the INF, which regulated missiles that had a distance, a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers, or 310 to about 3,400 miles. And it's just the risk that we created by putting all of these launchers on the border of Russia on the basis of the fabricated claim that was to defend against an Iranian missile threat, because now they could launch a first strike against which Russia would only have minutes to respond. It's absolutely outrageous. This is grossly destabilizing. Meanwhile, Bibi has hit Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon in a desperate re-election bid. It's absolutely shocking. He's going all over the place, all out, to try to get himself re-elected. Carried out attacks on the Lebanese capital in Beirut, targeting Hezbollah. Israeli drones slammed into western Iraq, killing at least one member of the Shia militia there. That means that Israel has been engaged in 3 distinct countries: Iraqi Shiite militia, Hezbollah, Syrian and Iranian forces in Syria. A 5th faction. Monday, Israel attacked a Palestinian base in northern Lebanon. This is stunning, where U.S. officials have confirmed the Israeli air raid in Iraq. The confirmation comes as Bibi Netanyahu hinted his country was behind recent air raids that have hit bases and munition depots belonging to the Iranian-backed paramilitary forces in Iraq. Iraqi officials say this Israeli strikes are a declaration of war. The Lebanese PM has said the same thing. We may be we may be on the verge of a war in the Middle East, because Bibi Netanyahu believes that is the mechanism that will get him re-elected to an unprecedented term as Prime Minister of Israel, in spite of his corruption charges, where he made himself the Minister of Justice so he could suppress them. Scott, this is just disgusting beyond belief.
Well, they always seem to do this on the weekend too, and we've seen Netanyahu launching aerial drones, the little remote-controlled drones with bombs on them at Lebanon, simultaneous with their missile strikes in Syria, and also coordinated with their strikes in Iraq against, quote, Iranian targets. I said on Press TV, we're going to be seeing drones used by Israeli Mossad agents in the United States, most likely bombing freeways or baseball stadiums or football stadiums, large-scale events so they can maximize civilian casualties. Las Vegas type of musical concerts again. I anticipate they'll ratchet it up over the holidays. So you'll have the Christmas season, I guesstimate, will be filled with attacks and false flags and bloodshed to traumatize the Americans so that they gear up for war in the summer of 2020. That's just my guess. That's the strategy I think is going to be followed. Netanyahu is desperate to try and lure the United States into another, Iraq War 2.0. To take against Iran, and Lindsey Graham is a willing participant, probably because they've got video of him on Epstein Island having anal sex with little boys. I think they blackmailed Lindsey Graham, and he's falling into this, and he likes to be blackmailed. That's why he went over and took millions of dollars of cash with John McCain when he was in Libya, as most of the Libyan CIA, Saudi Arabia terrorists and Qataris were given bags of cash to people. So Lindsey Graham is playing a part in this U.S.-Israeli alliance. They're gearing up using drones. They're trying to provoke an action by Iran, by Russia, by Turkey and Iraq, so that Israel can play the victim. But I don't think the world's going to fall for that. I think they know Netanyahu is on borrowed time. He's on thin ice. He could still be indicted, and I hope and think he will. Robert David Steele has talked about that. So Netanyahu could be removed. His wife could be removed. His son could be removed. And that's why he's desperate to trigger a war to protect himself, to show, now that we're in a war, we need to forget all the stuff I did in the past so that we can win this. That's his cover. So the question is Trump going to join that war and commit American lives and risk a civil war in America and people standing up saying, hell no, we won't go, and overthrowing his presidency in a very violent way? Remember, this is not just, if Trump loses, he just doesn't disappear. Trump is evaporated from history. I mean, physically. I think he and his whole family would be blamed. They would be the scapegoat and sacrificed most likely for this by the left and by a lot of other parties. And as much as I don't want to see that happen, he is on dangerous ice when he's following the Zionist route, because they don't have any love for him. They don't have any support for him. They're going to use him, like Netanyahu said. They will use the cow and then discard it, slaughter it. So Trump has come in, and the question is, how is this war going to be manifested? At the same time, Trump also has a card to play, because he's given the Israelis and Netanyahu and Mossad so much with the embassy moved and the Golan Heights. He can theoretically sideline them and say, I've done everything for you. I've done everything for Adelson. I'm done. I'm cutting off the money supply and the political favors. Now I'm going to Iran to make a deal so I can use that as political capital to stay elected. I'm going to go to Iran. I'm going to go to Russia. He's already doing that by getting Russia back into the G8. He's going to be Russia's cheerleader, saying, G8, if you're serious, get Russia in here. There was no Russia hoax. This was the far left acting like far left lunatics. That's the other reason Europe doesn't love this idea of Russia, because Russia's conservative. The Europeans are far left. Only a far left idiot would let hundreds of thousands of refugees and migrants from Africa, where they eat cats and don't know what toilet paper is and don't have the language or skills, to come up into Sweden and Germany and Britain. So that's what the left of Europe has done. Russia's conservative. Trump's supposed to be conservative. So I think he's going to be backing and pushing Russia favorably. And then Russia can use that to leverage into Iran and say, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's make a deal. the problem is too that Trump has allowed people like Sigal Mandelker, who is the Office of Foreign Assets Control at the U.S. Department of Treasury, to put sanctions on Iran and designate New Horizon and Nader Talebzadeh and Hamid Gashgabi, the people who ran the conference that I was at, that a variety of other American people from the State Department and Pentagon were at. Trump has allowed the Treasury Department to designate New Horizon as a specific designated global terrorist organization, which is absolutely false.
Lunatic, actually, Scott. Completely lunatic.
Absolutely, I agree
Gathering
too.
of intellectuals from around the world as a terrorist organization. Give me a break.
And Trump needs to go, no, they're not. I'm letting these guys go to the conference because, Jim, getting Americans over there, real good Americans like you and I and others, we have more positive impact on that conservative culture than anybody else in this country. In 50 years, they all are conservative, and when they meet with us and talk with us, they're given hope, and in that hope, Trump can lay the seeds for political calming down and new relationships. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Meanwhile, Israel is preparing to bomb the Houthis in Yemen to warn them away from Iran. I mean, this is completely disgusting. Israeli forces are preparing to target resistance forces in southwestern Yemen near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, according to Kuwaiti paper Al Jared Press TV reported Friday. Mossad and Israeli military intelligence are on the hunt for any attempt by Iran to deliver weapons, and the Houthis have transferred some of their drones and missiles to Iraq to confuse the Israelis. Iraq closed its airspace last week to all unauthorized flights, including U.S. aircraft, after an alleged Israeli airstrike on an arms depot belonging to the state-sponsored militia Popular Mobilization Units near Baghdad killed a civilian and wounded nearly 40 others. Iraqi officials have said the strikes could not have happened without U.S. approval, and PMU second in command holds the U.S. fully responsible for the Israeli attacks. Instead of chasing Daesh terrorists, U.S. military aircraft are collecting information and data concerning the brigades of Popular Mobilization Units in their warehouses and arms depot, he said in a statement Wednesday. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hinted during a visit to Iraq in January the U.S. would not react to Israeli attacks against PMU's forces, which are on friendly terms with Iran. This is just disgraceful.
Oh, terrible.
Absolutely disgraceful. Mainly, Phil Girardi writes why a defense agreement with Israel would be a disaster for Americans. He begins by talking about 2 world wars began because of unconditional pledges made by one country to come to the assistance of another. On July 5th, 2014, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany pledged his country's complete support for whatever response Austria-Hungary would choose to make against Serbia after the June 28th assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria by a Serbian nationalist during an official visit to Sarajevo, Bosnia. This fatal error went down in history as Germany's carte blanche or blank check assurance to Austria that led directly to World War I. Israel would use any defense alliance to draw the United States into wars with Iran and whoever else Israel designates. It would be an absurdity, Scott. And Phil Girardi is calling it out very, very appropriately. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I like Phil Giraldi a lot. He was over in Iran with us. He's a former CIA analyst. He was an Army officer. He's a linguist. He was in Europe during the communist, Cold War years. He was also in Turkey. And I really trust him and I like him. Phil and I and Michael Maloof were down on Tehran's state TV, the only 3 Americans that have been live on state TV in Iran in probably 50, 60 years, if ever. I don't know. I mean, it was an amazing event when we went over there. And Phil's pointing out so much in the hypocrisy and the dangers of the Trump foreign policy, the dangers of being a perceived Zionist, pro-Israeli, entity, and the backlash that's going to cause in the United States. I think all Americans are catching up to that, and I like to think Trump does and shifts and recognizes he's walking on ice that's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and it will break through. And no amount of patchwork is going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. He's going to be removed. So, foreign policy really, I think, in many ways, is more important than domestic policy in people's minds, because domestic policy, the Second Amendment exists to give people the freedom to exercise domestic policy, and everybody knows that, and all politics is local. But foreign policy is not local, and foreign policy has the danger of killing everybody and getting your kids chewed up and chopped up into, war fodder, and there's no need for it. And there's also a strain of hypocrisy, because everybody has said Trump promised to get us out of these Middle East wars. He went in, and instead he's made deals and compromises with the scum of humanity, which include all of the military-industrial complex traders that live by war, as well as the people like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Gina Haspel, and everybody else who is recognized as, really traitors and criminals from the 9/11 years on. So Trump has got into bed with these people, and every American with a brain is looking with disgust, saying, you're doing exactly the opposite what you promised us you would not do. And as much as we're hoping that you're going to wake up and go, wow, I was dreaming, I don't know what happened, people are becoming increasingly ready to pull out their pen and write him off and say, I'm just not going to vote, and write him away. Jim?
Wow, that's awesome.
We have two different kinds of disasters, one having to do with the environment, the other technological, that all combine. Bolsonaro admits farmers may have started Amazon wildfires, warns the world not to interfere. As the outcry over the wildfires currently tearing through the Amazon intensifies, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro admitted on Thursday farmers might be illegally setting fires to clear land for pasture, after previously blaming NGOs for the 85% spike in wildfires compared to 2018, Reuters reports. And you can see the number growing there in the bar graph. But he warned outsiders not to interfere, as French President Emmanuel Macron insisted the situation in Brazil should be discussed by the G7 this weekend, while UN Secretary General Guterres expressed concern about the fires via Twitter. Macron called the fires an international crisis in a tweet, as indeed they do appear to be. The Amazon is bigger than Europe. How will you fight criminal fires in such an area? He asked reporters as he asked the president, we do not have the resources for that. According to governmental figures, wildfires have nearly doubled during this year's dry season. Federal prosecutors said they were investigating the spike in deforestation and wildfires to determine whether there had been reduced monitoring and enforcement of environmental protections, but some have accused Bolsonaro of tacitly condoning the farmers by insisting Brazil should open up more of the rainforest to business interests like farming and mining. Roughly 60% of the rainforest is in Brazil. Here's a map of the stunning arrangement of fires that are taking place. This is just in the last red in the last 24 hours, gold in the last 48, yellow in the past 7 days. I mean, it's absolutely stunning.
Wow.
Prosecutors said they'd look into an ad they said was published in a local newspaper encouraging farmers to participate in a fire day in which they would burn large areas of forest to show Bolsonaro their willingness to work. Colombia, which is also home to part of the forest, of the rainforest, said Thursday it would support protecting against the fires. Colombian authorities are already working to contain the propagation of these fires toward Colombian territory, and we are willing to collaborate with our neighbors in this common cause, said the Colombian Foreign Ministry. This is very, very troubling indeed. Meanwhile, we have the artificial created threat of 5G. Get this. Brussels halts 5G deployment indefinitely. 5G projects, as authorities, not compatible with radiation safety standards. In the next year, preliminary 5G networks are set to roll out in China, the US, South Korea, and Japan. In the next 7, operators are projected to invest over $1 trillion to expand 5G wireless technology. With 5G, the telecom industry promises instant connectivity, paving the way for smart cities. 5G is a big tech dream come true, a data collection boom that will tie all internet-connected devices together and increase connectivity speeds up to 1,000 times greater than existing 4G networks. As investors scramble to get a piece of the 5G pie, however, the technology is not projected for deployment in every first world country, nor will it be accepted by every big city. It's a major threat. In fact, the minister of the government of Brussels Capital Region has vowed to halt 5G deployment. The people of Brussels are not guinea pigs whose health I can sell at a profit, she stated in an interview with Liaco. I cannot welcome such technology if the radiation standards which must protect the citizen are not respected, 5G or not. No exceptions will be made in Brussels. Vermont warns that 5G violates Belgian radiation safety standards. Vermont is heeding the warning of over 240 scientists and doctors from over 41 nations who have published research documenting the harmful effects of 5G radiation on all biological life. These scientists have appealed to the UN, calling for a moratorium on 5G. The adverse effects of radio frequency and millimeter waves on human and environmental health are well documented. 5G radiation has been shown to cause changes in bacterial growth, neuropsychiatric effects, DNA damage, even cancer. Permissive countries that sacrifice the health of their population only consider the thermal effects of 5G. But there's much more to 5G radiation than that. Scientists warn. Dr. Martin Paul of Washington State University calls the 5G rollout the stupidest idea in the history of the world. In his studies, he warns about the very high energy outputs required to ensure sufficient penetration of electromagnetic frequency waves. He also documents the extraordinarily high numbers of antennae that are planned, which will increase exposure to deeply penetrating radiation. He also warns about the extremely high pulsation levels, high-level interaction of 5G frequency on charged groups, including the voltage sensor charged groups. This rapid influx of pulsed electromagnetic frequency fields has been shown to stress the calcium channels of cells, voltage-gated calcium channels, or VGCC. Two body systems most impacted by pulse EMFs are the eyes and the kidneys. In preliminary studies, the downstream effects of VGCC activation include cataracts, detached retinas, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. Moreover, the fluids in the kidneys allow regeneration of electrical fields. This impacts the glomerular filtration and reabsorption, adversely affecting two major functions of the kidneys. The influx of 5G antennae will send out deeply penetrating magnetic fields that will disturb electrically charged groups that are dissolved in the aqueous phases of the body. When these charged groups are excited to action, they can regenerate electric fields that are essentially identical to the electric fields pulsing from the original EMFs. The amplification of electrical fields across plasma membranes produces EMF effects deep within the body, because voltage sensors in the body are sensitive to outside electrical forces and will reverberate the frequency. 5G will be the greatest assault of electric forces the body has ever had to endure. Once 5G is rolled out, the assault will be non-stop. Because Brussels is calling out the dangers of 5G and blocking its rollout, they are currently a world leader for protecting human health. To learn more about 5G, check out Radiation News. This is stunning stuff. Scott.
Yeah, we battled 5G in the town hall level by going to the town council, and I stood up and spoke and said, you are all going to be held legally responsible in your individual and corporate capacities, because this technology has a overwhelming detrimental corrosive effect on the body. And your legal presumption that you can do this based on the 1990s law that says cell phone towers can be placed and no one can stop it is inappropriate. It's totally unconstitutional, because that law does not apply to 5G in this argument, because it's not about cell phone towers in the 1990s based on cell phone technology in the 1990s. It's based on 5G technology, which is depriving Americans of their right to life, as well as liberty and happiness, but it's a constitutional issue. It's a danger, it's a threat, it's a constitutional violation of people's right to life by putting up this technology that naturally has all of these detrimental effects. So people can file injunctions to stop them from coming to their towns, going to court, citing material like this, that the evidence proves that 5G technology is a very lethal technology, and the profiteering that the companies like Verizon and Comcast are doing should be immediately thrown out, because it's a danger to the public health. And finally, Jim, I want to say one thing, just because we're running out of time. I want to remind people of Julian Assange and the Epstein story. We can't let these fade into sunset. John Pilger was on RT's Ashton Ratanzi, and he said he had went and visited Julian Assange and said he was getting weaker, he was disintegrating more, he was looking very, very bad. And this in one sense was very disturbing, because I want to keep out hope that Julian Assange is being in a witness protection program, and that he's not in jail, giving all of the evidence and the testimony that he has about the greatest crimes that occurred under the Obama administration that the WikiLeaks cables reveal. And I have copies of them. I wrote about them in my book, Shell Game. And people can see the WikiLeaks cables that clearly show Hillary Clinton and the Swiss bank terrorist financing she did at shellgamewhistleblower.com. But Julian Assange still being in jail tells me Trump is either a traitor or a ignorant fool, because there's no reason that Julian Assange should be in prison, not for running bail, not based on the intelligence that he has. And the British are not the allies of the United States, based on the Russian hoax collusion that they tried to do. This was deep state operations. This is a deep state operation against Julian Assange. And the same applies with Epstein. The sex trafficking guy Epstein, I don't think he's dead, but if he is, we're the stupidest or most corrupt people on the planet, because Epstein seemed to have the key intelligence of the greatest traitors in the American government, and that's precisely what we needed. He had all of the documents and the cell phones and the videotapes of every traitor in the government, in the military, in the media, that the American people would demand to know, as well as the truth about the pedophilia, which has been running rampant from Pizzagate and all sorts of other areas. So I want to always draw attention back to the Epstein debacle, or the corruption that needs to be exposed, and the Julian Assange imprisonment that needs to be immediately reversed, if not using Assange for the testimony of all the real crimes that were going on. Jim?
Real quickly about 5G, you know something, everybody knows something about microwaves. What do microwaves do? They cook meat. What do these waves do? It's very similar.
Right. They cook us from the inside out. From the inside out, we're cooked.
Yeah, that's
5G,
right.
this is a killing machine.
That's right.
Meanwhile, we have a mass shooting at a California Marriott foiled after cops arrest the cook. 37 who'd stockpiled tactical rifles and high-capacity magazines told a colleague he was planning to kill staff and guests following an human resources dispute. His plan was foiled when he let slip his deadly intentions to a colleague who informed the manager, who called the Long Beach police. The volume of weapons meant he would have been capable of causing an attack similar to the Las Vegas shooting of 2017, which resulted in 58 people being killed and 422 more wounded, or so we have been told. Actually, although the sheriff said he had no evidence of any shots being fired from other than the 32nd floor of the wing, here you can see shots being fired from the center of the hotel in Las Vegas. See the flashing? This is actually a flashing light coordinated with a pre-recorded soundtrack of a machine gun firing. This is a Hollywood-style production. It was a movie. We also had one of my Facebook friends who contacted the 3 closest hospitals, Spring Valley, EMG in North Vista, asked if they could check their registry for a gunshot victim taken there from the mass shooting at the Mandalay Bay. I received the same reply from each. No gunshot victims were admitted. You may want to check with local police. One woman thoughtfully added, if you're referring to the crisis drill everyone keeps calling about, I'm sorry, there were no real gunshot victims. That was just a drill. If you don't believe, call themselves. I called and confirmed what she had reported. They were transporting bodies from funeral homes to ambulances to make it look as though these were victims of the Las Vegas shooting, people who are already dead. They claim to have found a mini massacre at the Hooters in Las Vegas because there were 17 ambulances pulled up in front. But the video footage from inside the Hooters showed a lot of bored crisis actors, each with their own sheet, waiting to be taken out on a stretcher as another victim of the mass shooting in Las Vegas. Mona Alexis Presley even tracked down the Las Vegas police crime map for the 1 mile square area, including the concert area. And you know, it's from 8 p.m. the night to 8 p.m. the following day. Only robbery, other disturbance, motor vehicle, other disturbance, malicious destruction, burglary, stolen motor vehicle, burglary, assault and battery, assault and battery, assault and batter. Not a single gunshot victim because there were none. It was outrageous. It was completely fraudulent. So it may well be when they say it would have been just like Las Vegas, it would have been just like Las Vegas, another elaborately staged fraudulent event to take guns away from the American people. Scott.
Yeah, the Las Vegas shooting is coming out, of course, as false flag event. I saw that video, and it was taken down off the internet when you saw that 3-pulse blast of light coming from one of the hotel windows. And obviously it wasn't being fired because that window wasn't blown out. That wasn't shattered. That was on like the 3rd or 4th floor. The shooting allegedly happened at the very top. So there was all sorts of weird things. And of course we go to the photographs of the shooter with the rifle laid on top of his leg, standing up on its tripod as if it had just been laid over his leg. Whereas anyone who realized if he had a rifle, it would have fallen down. But then again, it wouldn't have been in the left-handed position if he was right-handed. So the whole thing, the whole shooting event is fake. Go ahead.
Yeah. I thought we'd run out of time, but actually got a minute more. Scott, you were brilliant on Las Vegas, detecting that the shells scattered around the presumptive body included CO2 cartridges and blank cartridges. It was completely staged. The body was not the same body as the one that was subjected to autopsy. There were differences in their heights. The body in the room appeared to have actually been put on ice and was even defrosting. The whole thing was ridiculously, absurdly fraudulent. But the liberals are just going gangbusters using these to deprive the American people of the right to defend themselves or the nation of its national security, because nothing could be a greater source to the security of the United States of America than to have 100 million armed Americans who could come to the nation's defense.
So we're just about out of time here, folks, but I would say about Las Vegas, how about Epstein? I mean, I want to see his body. I want to see the corpse. I want to see some proof. I don't believe that coroner for a minute. I think these people have been bought off by that $100 million bond from the Mossad for Epstein. Anyway, you've been watching Truth versus News here, and really appreciate you watching it here on August 26th. It's been a fantastic show, and we've been exposing the...
Come on, you are fake news. Okay, you're fake news.
Yeah, that's what we have is Truth versus Official Facts and Acts on Truth versus News. And I'm sure glad that you're watching here, because this is great. So share it as you can. Share it everywhere. We need to know the truth, folks, and we're out of here. Thanks so much for watching. Happy Labor Day to you.